My husband handed me divorce papers at my birthday party. "We're done," he sneered. "Mom's promoting your ex in your place." He laughed coldly. "Pack your trash." His mother nodded. "Clean out your desk tomorrow." They left me standing alone. 3 days later, my phone exploded with panicked voicemails. 78 of them, to be exact, after they realized who I really was. But that came later. Before the implosion, before the cold fury took hold, there was the gilded cage. My life had seemed, to all outward appearances, a meticulously crafted masterpiece of success. Adeline Vance. A name synonymous with sharp financial acumen and an almost uncanny ability to turn lead into gold. I was a self-made financial advisor. A woman who had pulled herself up by her bootstraps from modest beginnings, building a formidable reputation in the cutthroat world of New York finance. My firm, Vance Capital, wasn't the biggest, but it was respected, fiercely independent, and boasted a client roster that spoke volumes. And then there was Ronan Stafford, the son of Margaret Stafford, a doyenne of industry, and a woman whose name alone commanded respect and fear on Wall Street. Ronan was charming, effortlessly handsome, with eyes that promised a lifetime of adventure and a smile that could disarm anyone. Our whirlwind romance, culminating in a lavish Hamptons wedding 3 years prior, had been the talk of the city. We were the power couple, the fusion of old money and new ambition, dinners at exclusive clubs, weekends at our sprawling estate in the Hamptons, philanthropy galas. It was a life many only dreamed of, and I had built my piece of it with my own 2 hands. I genuinely believed I had found my partner, a man who admired my drive and shared my vision. For a long time I was happy. Truly, the cracks, when they began, were almost imperceptible, like hairline fractures in a priceless vase. Ronan became increasingly distant, often cloistered in late-night meetings I wasn't privy to, his phone a constant, glowing barrier between us. He'd brush off my questions about work with vague corporate jargon, his once sparkling eyes now holding a guardedness I couldn't quite decipher. I told myself it was the pressure of his family's empire, the natural evolution of a relationship, but a prickle of unease started to settle in my gut. A low hum of dissonance beneath the symphony of our perfect life. Then there were the cryptic messages from Thea, my old friend, my confidant, a master hacker with an encyclopedic knowledge of corporate underbellies. "Stay sharp, Adeline," one message read. "The wolves are circling." Another more chilling, "Trust no one, not even those closest." I dismissed them, at first, as Thea being her usual paranoid self, ever vigilant in her digital shadows. I thought she was hinting at a competitor, a corporate rival, not someone sitting at my own breakfast table. The unease solidified into a tangible dread as my 40th birthday approached. It was meant to be a celebration, a landmark. We'd booked the entire ballroom at the Street, Regis, a grand affair befitting the Stafford name. The scent of lilies and expensive champagne hung heavy in the air. Tuxedos and ball gowns floated past, a sea of smiles and air kisses, but my smile felt brittle. My champagne tasted flat. The first jarring note in my perfect symphony came with her arrival. Faye Winters, Ronan's ex, a woman whose name hadn't been uttered in our circle for years, suddenly gliding into my party, her eyes fixed on me with an unsettling predatory glint. Ronan greeted her with a familiarity that sent a shiver down my spine. The air grew thick, suffocating. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the cracks weren't just cracks anymore. They were fissures, widening rapidly, threatening to swallow everything I had built. Ronan's smile, as he turned from Faye, was a mask of practiced indifference, but his eyes held a glint of something far more sinister than casual disdain. He moved towards me, not with the loving embrace I'd once known, but with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. My hand, still holding a half-empty champagne flute, trembled imperceptibly as he reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke tuxedo. From it, he produced a slim, legal-sized envelope, stark white against the dark fabric. My breath hitched. He pressed it into my hand, his fingers brushing mine with a coldness that felt like death. Then, the words, delivered with a casual cruelty that ripped through the glittering facade of the ballroom. "We're done, Adeline. Consider this your severance package." My gaze dropped to the document. "Petition for dissolution of marriage." The words blurred, then sharpened, stabbing into my core. Ronan leaned in, his voice a low sneer meant only for me, yet loud enough for the few lingering guests who had grown unnervingly quiet. Their gazes now fixed on us. "Mom's promoting your ex in your place. Faye will be taking over Vance Capital. She's already got your clients lined up." A cold, hollow laugh escaped his lips. "Pack your trash, Adeline. Your gilded cage has no room for you anymore." Margaret, a formidable figure in an emerald gown, stepped forward, her expression a glacial mask. "Clean out your desk tomorrow, Adeline. And don't forget to return the company car. Everything else you own is about to be reevaluated." She spoke with a detached finality, as if discussing a faulty appliance rather than dismantling a human life. Faye, standing beside Margaret, offered a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. A predator savoring its kill. The full weight of it, the sickening enormity of their betrayal, crashed over me. It wasn't just a divorce, it was an execution. A meticulously planned corporate decapitation orchestrated under the guise of a birthday celebration. Asset transfers, fraudulent client documents, stolen intellectual property. The details flashed through my mind, each a poisoned dart aimed at the very heart of my career. My reputation, my life's work. They hadn't just moved to sever ties. They had moved to annihilate me, to erase every trace of my existence from the world I had so painstakingly built. The luxury around me, the soft strains of the string quartet, the expensive perfume in the air, it all felt like a mockery. A stage setting for my public downfall. The shock was a physical blow. A vacuum that sucked the air from my lungs, the sound from my ears, the festive music, the chatter, the clinking of glasses, it all dissolved into a distant hum. My vision narrowed, focusing only on the three smug, cruel faces before me. Ronan, Margaret, Faye. My husband, my mother-in-law, his former lover, a perfect trio of betrayal. My perfectly coiffed hair, my designer gown, my carefully constructed image. They all felt like fragile props on a collapsing stage. My fingers tightened around the divorce papers, the delicate parchment threatening to tear, much like my composure. But the initial paralysis, the gasp of disbelief, lasted only a fleeting second. Below the surface, beneath the polished veneer of Adeline Vance, something ancient and primal began to stir. A molten core of fury, cold and sharp, ignited in my gut. The humiliation was a spark, the injustice a roaring flame. They had tried to break me, to erase me. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet strength for weakness, my ambition for naive hunger. And in that moment, standing alone amidst the ruins of my perfect life, surrounded by a symphony of their deceit, I made a silent vow. This was not the end. This was the beginning of their reckoning. They would regret this day. Every single one of them. The Street Regis Ballroom, once a tableau of my carefully constructed life, now felt like a mausoleum. The last lingering guests, sensing the invisible chill that had descended, evaporated silently, their hushed whispers a final, stinging reminder. I was left utterly alone amidst the remnants of my failed celebration. The echo of their cruel laughter still ringing in my ears. The divorce papers, now crumpled in my white-knuckled grip, felt like ashes, the weight of their words heavier than any physical blow. For a fragile, agonizing moment, I let the despair wash over me. It was a cold, engulfing tide, threatening to drown the smoldering fire in my veins. My meticulously built life, my reputation, my sense of self, my very identity, lay shattered at my feet. The weight of it pressed down, a suffocating blanket woven from humiliation and profound loss. I saw myself not as Adeline Vance, the formidable financial advisor, but as a discarded plaything, A pawn expertly sacrificed in a game I hadn't even known I was playing. My vision blurred. The opulent crystal chandeliers above mocking my broken dreams. Tears threatening to spill. A weakness I refused to indulge. But then, a flicker. Deep within, where the despair sought to take root and flourish, something else ignited. A cold, surgical precision, honed by years of surviving battles far more brutal than a public betrayal. This wasn't the first time my world had been ripped apart by the calculating machinations of the powerful. The Adeline Vance persona, built brick by painful brick from the ground up in the unforgiving crucible of New York, was a shield. A carefully cultivated illusion of vulnerability. Beneath it lay another identity. One forged in the inferno of loss and necessity. A name I rarely allowed myself to remember. Keller. The memories suppressed for decades by sheer force of will, surged back with a brutal, visceral clarity. My parents, brilliant and idealistic, had poured their very souls into a revolutionary tech startup, nestled in the unassuming heart of the Midwest. I remembered the fierce light in their eyes, the late nights fueled by cheap coffee and boundless ambition, the sacrifices made for a vision of a better future. And then, the predators, the corporate vultures, circling patiently from their high-rise towers, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. They dismantled my parents' dreams, systematically stole their innovations, and left them with nothing but the bitter taste of bankruptcy and broken spirits. I remembered the hushed conversations behind closed doors, the desperate, pleading phone calls, the slow, agonizing death of their company that mirrored the agonizing death of their hope. I remembered their faces, etched with a profound defeat that I had vowed, even as a child, I would never, ever know. The Stafford betrayal wasn't merely a personal slight. It was a grotesque, infuriating echo of a past trauma, a chilling pattern of corporate greed and human callousness I had witnessed firsthand, a scar that had never truly healed. This time, I wouldn't just watch. That haunting memory, the vivid ghost of my parents' ruin, wasn't a weight. It was fuel. The choice, though momentarily agonizing, was now stark and crystalline. Crumble and allow them the satisfaction of victory, or rise from these ashes and make them pay a price they could never imagine. The Adeline Vance who had just been publicly humiliated might have retreated, licked her wounds in quiet solitude, but Keller was a strategist, a phantom, a force that operated with ruthless efficiency in the deepest shadows. There would be no retreat, only a precise, brutal advance, a carefully orchestrated symphony of their undoing. My first, most urgent priority was to secure what little they hadn't yet managed to seize: my personal accounts, discreet investments, and the offshore trusts. The emergency contingencies I had meticulously set up long ago, born of a deep-seated, inherited distrust of absolute dependence. I moved with a chilling swiftness, initiating transfers and locking down access points even as the Street Regis staff began their quiet, respectful cleanup around me. Oblivious to the war that had just been declared, my phone, still thankfully in my possession, became a conduit to a world they knew nothing about. Old contacts, coded messages, encrypted channels, the precise language of my other time's life. Thea Russell, my hacker extraordinaire and oldest friend, would be the first. Maya Rodriguez, a brilliant legal mind with an unwavering moral compass, and a penchant for corporate warfare. Victoria Castillo, my quiet, formidable operations manager from a time before Vance Capital even existed. The hidden network, dormant for years, hummed back to life with a single, unyielding purpose, coalescing around a raw, burning core of vengeance. The game had fundamentally changed, and Ronan, Margaret and Faye had no idea, not the slightest clue, who they were truly playing against. The gilded cage of my New York penthouse, where the betrayal had unfolded, no longer felt like a tomb but a command center. I stripped off the ruined gown, the silk feeling like a shroud, and donned the pragmatic comfort of a dark cashmere sweater and tailored trousers. Sleep was a distant luxury, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, sharp and clarifying, demanded action. My fingers, steady now, moved across a secure terminal, tapping into the labyrinthine data streams that comprised Axiom Capital, my true firm, my ghost in the machine. Axiom wasn't an office. It was a concept, a distributed network of the best minds I'd cultivated over 2 decades, each operating from their own secure enclaves across the globe, bound by an unshakable loyalty forged in shared pasts and a mutual disdain for corporate predators. The encrypted comms channel blinked green. "Thea," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "Initiate Project Cerberus, full scope." A moment of silence, then Thea's familiar voice, crisp and alert, pierced the sterile air. "On it, Adeline. Starting with the offshore shell corporations Ronan used for the client transfers, they're messier than he thinks." Within minutes, I saw her digital footprints begin to trace through layers of obfuscation, a phantom moving silently through the financial ether. Next, Maya. My legal bulldog. A woman who could dismantle a corporate charter with the precision of a surgeon and the ferocity of a wolverine. "Maya, prepare the injunctions, freeze every Stafford holding remotely connected to Vance Capital. Target the leveraged buyouts Ronan orchestrated last quarter. Find the pressure points." She didn't ask questions, didn't need to. Her legal team, already on standby, was a finely tuned machine, ready to unleash a barrage of litigation that would cripple them before they could even counter. And then there was Victoria, the silent architect of our physical operations, the woman who could make things disappear or appear with equal ease. "Victoria, I need a full sweep of Vance Capital's servers, every shred of data Ronan and Faye have touched. Specifically, the client roster and any communication regarding the asset stripping. I want hard copies, digital backups, and an anonymous leak to the financial press when I give the word." Her response was a single, concise, "Understood," followed by a series of coordinates for our secure data retrieval team. The shift was immediate, tectonic. The Staffords had spent months carefully planning my downfall. I would dismantle theirs in days, perhaps hours. My countermoves were swift, surgical, and utterly merciless. The first domino fell less than 12 hours later. A major financial news outlet, thanks to Victoria's discreet leak, broke a story about unusual trading activities and significant asset reallocations within Stafford Holdings, raising red flags for institutional investors. It was a subtle prod, but enough to trigger a cascade. As dawn broke over the city, I watched the news cycle unfold from my command center. Ronan's carefully constructed illusion of stability began to crack. First, a major institutional client, alerted by the media, froze their accounts with Vance Capital. Then another, and another. Their initial attempts to transfer my clients' portfolios into Phase Care were met with a wall of unexpected resistance. Axiom had already secured those relationships, subtly guiding my former clients, and some who weren't even mine but simply vulnerable, to discreetly move their assets away from the impending disaster. I saw the frantic emails, intercepted by Thea, flying between Margaret and Faye. Panic. Confusion. "What's happening?" Faye's messages screamed. "The accounts are locking. We can't access the Lazard portfolio." Margaret, ever the stoic, initially tried to dismiss it as a glitch. But the growing list of frozen accounts, the urgent calls from auditors, and the plummeting stock prices of their key tech holdings told a different story. The market, unforgiving and swift, reacted to every ripple Axiom created. Ronan, I imagined, was a different story. I saw a leaked photo, taken by a paparazzi drone Victoria had deployed, of him pacing frantically on his Hamptons balcony, phone pressed to his ear, his usually impeccable hair disheveled. The sneer I remembered from last night would have been long gone, replaced by a growing, palpable fear. He had seen my public persona, the successful financial advisor. He had never seen Keller, the force that operated with precision in the shadows. He had mistaken my quiet strength for weakness, my ambition for naive hunger. And now, as his world began to crumble around him, brick by painful brick, he was finally beginning to realize the terrifying truth. He had unleashed a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The first desperate plea came not from a lawyer, nor a flustered associate, but directly from Ronan. My secure burner phone, a relic from my Keller days I rarely used, vibrated with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it, but something in the persistent rhythm of the buzzing compelled me. It rang again, then a third time. I picked up, silence stretching between us like a taut wire. "Adeline?" His voice was hoarse, strained, utterly devoid of the smug sneer I'd last heard. It was the sound of a man on the brink, fear and audible tremor beneath every syllable. The image of him, disheveled on his Hamptons balcony, flashed in my mind. The reckoning, indeed. "What do you want, Ronan?" My voice was flat, devoid of warmth or curiosity. A surgical blade of indifference. I could hear his ragged breath, a desperate gasp for control. They're going to destroy me, Adeline," he choked out. "You're destroying us. You have to stop, please." A ghost of a smile touched my lips. "Us? There is no us, Ronan. You made sure of that. As for stopping, you clearly don't understand how this works." "No, you don't understand," he practically yelled, then lowered his voice, as if afraid of being overheard. It's not Margaret. Not really. She's just a figurehead. A pawn. We're all pawns." My blood ran cold despite myself. This wasn't the plea of a cornered man trying to salvage his pride. This was raw, abject terror, and it hinted at something far larger than the personal vendetta I was orchestrating. "Elaborate," I commanded, my voice betraying nothing. He took a shaky breath. "It's Eleanor Whitley, my godmother. She's the one pulling the strings. Always has been. Margaret just does what she's told. We all do." The name hung in the air, a chilling echo. Eleanor Whitley, the billionaire investor, known for her impenetrable networks and cutthroat acquisitions. A woman who moved through the upper echelons of power like a shadow. My mind, usually a fortress against shock, reeled for a split second. This shifted everything. My initial target, Ronan, Margaret, Faye, suddenly seemed like small-time thugs in a vast, interconnected criminal enterprise. "Whitley?" I asked, testing the name, letting it settle. "What does she have to do with my Times firm, my Times divorce?" Ronan's voice became a torrent, a desperate confession spilling out. "It was her idea, Adeline. All of it. The marriage, the expansion of Vance Capital, the eventual takeover. She saw your firm, your reputation, your independence as a threat to her consolidating power. She wanted to absorb you, dismantle you. Margaret was just following orders. She promised Faye control if she helped with the client transfers. I was supposed to soften you up, make you complacent, marry you, then betray you when the time was right. It was a long game." He paused, a pained gasp escaping him. "She thrives on chaos, Adeline. On control. She knew your parents too. She was one of the ones who picked apart their company when it went under. She told me you had a certain fire in your eyes, just like your father. She said it was a shame it had to be extinguished. She wanted to make an example of you, show everyone that no one, no matter how self-made, could stand against her." My breath hitched. The words hit me like a physical blow, colder and more potent than any betrayal Ronan or Margaret had inflicted. My parents, their company, the memory, a festering wound I had tried to cauterize with success and ambition, now ripped open with brutal precision. Eleanor Whitley, the architect of my family's first downfall, now orchestrating my own. It wasn't just an echo of past trauma, it was the source itself. The woman who had haunted my subconscious, the faceless entity behind my parents' ruin, now had a name and a face, and she had just extended her predatory reach into my carefully constructed life. The simmering cold rage I'd cultivated against Ronan and Margaret shifted, intensified, and transformed into something far more vast and terrifying. This was no longer about personal vengeance for a broken marriage and a stolen company. This was a war against a systemic cancer. a hidden power that had destroyed my family once and now sought to do it again. My revenge against Ronan and Margaret was a mere skirmish. The true battle had just been revealed, and for the first time in days, the numbness around my heart gave way to a singular, unwavering resolve. One that transcended anger and embraced a terrifying clarity. My mission had just expanded exponentially. The phone call ended, but Ronan's confession echoed. A poisonous seed that had taken root deep within me, blossoming into a chilling truth. Eleanor Whitley. The name now pulsed with a new, terrifying energy. No longer just a distant titan of industry, but a specter from my past. A shadow that had fallen over my family decades ago. The Stafford's downfall, satisfying as it was, now felt like a mere prologue. The real enemy had revealed herself. My command center hummed with a renewed grim purpose. Thea, Maya, and Victoria, sensing the shift in my focus, adapted with their usual seamless efficiency. Axiom, I commanded, my voice calm despite the storm raging inside. Turn your full resources to Eleanor Whitley. Every shell company, every acquisition, every political donation, every piece of litigation she's ever been involved in. I want her entire financial and corporate history. Going back 50 years, the data began to flow. A torrential river of information. Layers upon layers of corporate structures, intertwined directorships, offshore accounts, and labyrinthine partnerships unfurled before my eyes. Whitley wasn't just powerful, she was ubiquitous. A financial hydra with tentacles reaching into every conceivable sector. Tech, energy, real estate, media, even humanitarian aid. Her method was consistent, almost elegant in its ruthlessness. Identify promising ventures, subtly undermine them, then acquire them for pennies on the dollar, integrating their innovations into her vast, faceless empire. She didn't build, she absorbed. She didn't create, she consumed. As the weeks bled into a relentless blur of research, my hands often trembled as I clicked through archived documents, cross-referencing names and dates. And then, there it was. A faded newspaper clipping from the Times Des Moines Register *, circa 1992. Keller Innovations faces bankruptcy after hostile takeover bid fails. My breath hitched. Below the headline, a paragraph mentioned a mysterious holding company, Viridian Capital, which had aggressively bought up debt and patents before the final collapse. My heart hammered against my ribs. Viridian Capital. A quick search through Axiom's burgeoning database revealed its true owner. A nascent Eleanor Whitley, then a hungry young investor making her first major moves. The abstract pain of my parents' past, a story I had compartmentalized and suppressed, now surged into a brutal, visceral present. It wasn't just a generic corporate predator, it was times her asterisk. Eleanor Whitley had stood at the precipice of our family's ruin, pushing them over the edge. The old farmhouse in Iowa, once vibrant with the hum of my parents' dreams, flashed through my mind. I saw my father, Thomas Keller, his hands stained with grease from working on his prototypes, his eyes alight with the promise of his groundbreaking sustainable energy technology. My mother Elizabeth, a brilliant software engineer, coding late into the night, her coffee mug always by her side, believing in his vision with unwavering devotion. I remembered the fierce, protective love that had enveloped our small family. The sacrifices, the lean years, all fueled by the conviction that their innovation would change the world. Then came the darkness. The late-night phone calls that turned into hushed arguments. The forced smiles at the dinner table, the way their laughter, once so free, became strained, then vanished altogether. The slow, agonizing death of their company wasn't just financial. It was a spiritual drain, eroding their hope, their trust, their very essence. I remembered my father, once a beacon of unshakable optimism, staring blankly at the wall, the light in his eyes extinguished. My mother, wasting away, her brilliance dimmed by the suffocating weight of defeat. I was a child then, unable to grasp the full implications, but I felt the seismic shift, the chilling coldness, that replaced the warmth of their dreams. They had lost everything, not to a fair market battle, but to a calculated, insidious campaign orchestrated by Whitley. The revelation transformed my quest from a strategic maneuver into a sacred oath. Ronan's casual cruelty, Margaret's glacial dismissal, Faye's smug ambition, they were mere ripples on the surface. Eleanor Whitley was the current, the unseen force dragging everything into the abyss. This wasn't just about reclaiming my present. It was about honoring their past. It was about avenging the quiet despair that had settled over my parents, a despair that had ultimately broken them long before their bodies gave out. My personal betrayal now resonated with a generational echo, a deep-seated wound that demanded more than just justice. It demanded retribution on a scale commensurate with the decades of pain. The full scope of Whitley's network was mind-boggling. She operated through dozens of shell corporations, laundered money through complex international trusts, and wielded political influence like a well-oiled machine. Senators, judges, media moguls, all seemed to be, if not directly in her pocket, then at least carefully managed to serve her interests. Her power wasn't overt. It was insidious, a venom that slowly paralyzed. She specialized in corporate espionage, in cultivating whispers of scandal to destabilize targets, in acquiring patents through dubious means, and in creating legal loopholes that protected her from accountability. She wasn't building an empire, she was constructing a labyrinth designed to trap anyone who dared to challenge her. I understood now. My marriage to Ronan hadn't been a random act of betrayal. It had been a targeted strike. Whitley, knowing my background, my parents' history, had seen a nascent threat in my independent success. She hadn't just wanted Vance capital. She had wanted to prove a point, to extinguish the certain fire my father had possessed. A fire she had doused once before. The Stafford fiasco was a microcosm of her larger strategy. A theatrical display designed to break me psychologically before she broke me financially. But she had failed. She had underestimated the fire, not realizing it was forged in the very ashes she had created decades ago. The Adeline Vance she thought she was destroying was merely a persona. Beneath it, Keller had always been waiting. And now, armed with the horrifying truth, Keller was ready to hunt. My hunt for justice had just become a deeply personal crusade, a reckoning for 2 generations. Hunting her required not a head-on assault, but the meticulous dissection of a beast, vein by poisoned vein. Eleanor Whitley hadn't built an empire. She had woven a fortress of shadows, a labyrinth of interconnected deceit that spanned continents and decades. Axiom Capital, now fully repurposed, became my surgical instrument. Thea plunged into the digital realm, mapping Whitley's vast network of shell corporations, untangling the Gordian knots of her offshore trusts. Maya, with her legal scalpel, began to pry open the intricate corporate structures, identifying vulnerabilities in obscure regulatory filings and long-forgotten mergers. Victoria, ever the phantom, laid the groundwork for physical infiltration, preparing the necessary aliases, access points, and extraction routes. My days blurred into a relentless cycle of intelligence gathering. I watched Whitley from afar, a silent predator observing her prey. She was a creature of habit, frequenting exclusive charity galas, private art auctions, and discreet boardroom meetings. These were the high-stakes social arenas where power truly exchanged hands, where the unguarded word or the knowing glance could unravel years of meticulously maintained facades. It was a world I understood intimately, a deceptive dance I had once mastered as Adeline Vance. Now, as Keller, I would turn its own rules against its queen. My first calculated move was to infiltrate a seemingly innocuous energy conference in Geneva, a favored haunt of Whitley's lieutenants. Posing as a burgeoning impact investor interested in sustainable technology, a subtle, infuriating nod to my parents' legacy, I navigated the gilded hallways. My target, Marcus Thorne, Whitley's head of international acquisitions, a man with a reputation for both brilliance and ruthless efficiency. The challenge wasn't just gaining access, but earning his transient trust. The logistical hurdles were immense. Every conversation was recorded, every network connection monitored. Axiom's bespoke encryption protocols had to be flawless, our burner devices untraceable. I carried a custom-fabricated lapel pin, a microtransmitter designed by Thea, capable of siphoning data from any nearby unsecure device and transmitting it to a secure server. At a private reception, amidst the clinking of glasses and hushed deals, I found my opening. Thorne, a man with a penchant for expensive scotch and boasting, let slip details of a pending acquisition in Southeast Asia, involving a unique mineral deposit and questionable environmental waivers. It was a thread, thin but strong, that led directly to a shadowy shell company, known to be a front for Whitley's money laundering operations. The real test came a week later, back in New York. Thorne's indiscretion led us to a seemingly abandoned data center in an unassuming industrial park in Queens, rumored to be a backup server farm for one of Whitley's smaller tech ventures. Victoria confirmed it was lightly guarded, but boasted state-of-the-art biometrics. This required a direct physical entry. I couldn't risk sending anyone else. I needed to witness the layout, the subtle tells of Whitley's operational security. Under the cloak of a moonless night, I moved like a ghost. Clad in tactical gear, Thea providing real-time perimeter intel, the air inside was cold, sterile, humming with the silent power of servers. My fingers, nimble and practiced, bypassed the laser grids and pressure plates. I was downloading terabytes of encrypted data, financial ledgers, internal communications, patent acquisition records. When a sudden jarring clang echoed from the floor above, a security patrol, unexpected. My heart hammered against my ribs. A primal thrum of adrenaline. I flattened myself behind a bank of blinking servers, the cold metal pressing against my cheek. As footsteps approached, slow and deliberate, the light of a flashlight cut through the gloom, sweeping inches from my hiding spot. I held my breath, every muscle tensed, ready to strike or disappear. The guard paused, seemingly sensing something amiss. Then, with a sigh, moved on. My pulse roared in my ears. The near discovery was a visceral reminder. I was no longer merely a wronged woman seeking revenge. I was a phantom, walking through fire, gathering the very embers that would burn an empire to the ground. The data, once decrypted by Thea, was a treasure trove of Whitley's depravity. It painted a chilling picture of an organization built on systematic corporate espionage, insider trading on a colossal scale, and a sophisticated global money laundering pipeline that made the Staffords look like petty thieves. I found irrefutable evidence of her manipulating emerging markets, gutting struggling businesses for their intellectual property, and bribing foreign officials to secure lucrative resource contracts. There was even a section detailing her subtle influence on key political campaigns, ensuring that legislation favorable to her interests would always pass. Each file, each email, each stolen patent was another piece of the monstrous mosaic. This wasn't just about my parents, or my stolen company. This was about countless lives ruined, economies destabilized, and justice systematically perverted. The raw, burning core of vengeance solidified into something far colder, far more expansive. A duty. The serpent's coils stretched further than I had ever imagined, but with every piece of evidence, I was tracing its nervous system, learning its weaknesses, preparing to strike at its very head. The fortress of shadows was beginning to illuminate. Eleanor Whitley, a creature of absolute control, could not abide a disturbance in her meticulously ordered universe. My methodical dissection of her empire, while discreet, had not gone unnoticed. The quiet hum of Axiom Capital's operations, a digital whisper to the uninformed, was to her a deafening roar. Her counteroffensive began not with a bang, but with a series of chillingly precise legal maneuvers, designed to cripple without revealing her hand. The first volley arrived via a seemingly routine SEC audit targeting Axiom Capital itself. They alleged irregularities in offshore fund transfers and unusual trading patterns inconsistent with standard advisory practices. Maya, ever vigilant, immediately recognized the subtle fingerprints of Whitley's influence. The accusations were baseless, expertly crafted to consume our resources and time, forcing us to defend our very existence instead of prosecuting hers. We were drowning in discovery requests, facing a barrage of subpoenas that sought to expose our network, our methodologies, our very identity. Maya's team worked around the clock, constructing an impenetrable legal fortress. But the psychological toll of being under siege was undeniable. Meanwhile, Thea reported a surge in sophisticated cyber attacks against our secure servers, not just brute force attempts, but intelligent, adaptive malware designed to mimic our own Axiom protocols, seeking backdoors, trying to compromise our encrypted communications. She intercepted multiple attempts to plant Trojans within the systems of our key allies, aiming to turn our own weapons against us. She's trying to map our network, Adeline, Thea warned, her voice tight with focus. She wants to know who we are, where we operate. She's adapting, fast. The cat-and-mouse game had taken a dangerous turn. Whitley wasn't just reacting. She was learning. The pressure mounted, tightening its invisible grip. I found myself sleeping even less, my mind a constant whirl of contingencies and counter-strategies. The Adeline Vance I had constructed, the woman who effortlessly navigated high society and complex financial markets, felt like a distant memory. This was Keller's domain. The shadows, the calculations, the cold, stark reality of survival. The elegance of her attacks was almost admirable, a testament to her ruthless genius, but it only fueled my resolve. Then the game escalated from corporate warfare to something far more insidious. Victoria's team detected subtle, yet undeniable, attempts to compromise our physical security. A new face at my favorite discreet coffee shop, lingering too long. A sudden, unannounced maintenance check at my penthouse. The technician's credentials slightly off. My secure perimeter, established with Victoria's expert eye, became a constantly shifting battleground. I started varying my routes, abandoning my regular routines, and relying solely on my pre-programmed safe houses. The threat was no longer abstract. It was personal, breathing down my neck. One evening, after a particularly draining session reviewing Whitley's intricate web of shell companies, I found myself staring out at the New York skyline. The city lights a deceptive blanket over its hidden dangers. A wave of weariness washed over me. A chilling doubt. Could I truly win against such a pervasive, deeply entrenched power? Whitley wasn't just a billionaire. She was an institution. A hydra with countless heads, each protected by an army of lawyers, hackers, and enforcers. What if, in my pursuit of justice, I simply became another one of her victims, another casualty in her endless game of acquisition and control? The image of my parents, their faces etched with defeat, flashed through my mind, their hope extinguished, their fire doused. That vision, though painful, was also my anchor. It reminded me that retreating was not an option. It reminded me of the certain fire Whitley had spoken of, the one she believed she could extinguish again. But this time, that fire was tempered steel, hardened by their sacrifice, fueled by my rage. I pushed the doubt aside, hardening my resolve. My vulnerabilities, my moments of fear, were not weaknesses but gauges, telling me how close I was to the precipice, how much more I needed to push. I was playing against a master, yes. But she hadn't accounted for a ghost. She hadn't accounted for Keller. I had survived my own family's tragedy. I had built myself from nothing. I had outmaneuvered Ronan and Margaret with startling speed. I was still standing, and I was armed with knowledge she couldn't possibly fathom I possessed. The cat-and-mouse game was indeed intensifying, but the predator had just realized her prey was not only fighting back, but was now hunting her in return. The predator had indeed underestimated her prey, and now, the hunt was nearing its climax. Weeks of relentless assaults, both digital and legal, had only served to sharpen my focus, consolidating the scattered fragments of Eleanor Whitley's corruption into one damning, irrefutable tapestry. The SEC audit had been fended off, Axiom's servers hardened against the most sophisticated incursions, and Victoria's team had quietly neutralized the discreet surveillance attempts. Every countermove by Whitley had simply revealed another layer of her defenses, another thread in the vast, insidious web I was determined to unravel. "It's all here, Adeline." Thea's voice crackled through the encrypted channel, exhaustion evident but triumph shimmering beneath. Her screen, mirrored on my main console, displayed a final, cascading stream of data. Every single shell company, every off-book transaction, every illicit patent acquisition tied to Project Chimera, the Swiss bank accounts, the bribed officials in 3 different continents. The forensic audit is complete. It's a goldmine. She left no stone unturned in her greed, and we left no digital footprint untraced. The sheer volume of evidence was staggering, painting a comprehensive picture of a global financial predator, not just manipulating markets, but actively destroying lives for profit and power. Maya chimed in, her tone crisp. "The legal framework is solid. We have a clear path for indictments on racketeering, money laundering, corporate fraud, and obstruction of justice. It's an unassailable case. The only thing missing is her signature on a confession." My gaze swept across the meticulously organized screens, each a testament to Axiom's unyielding efficiency, and to the countless hours my team had sacrificed. The initial sting of Ronan's confession, the brutal realization of Whitley's generational betrayal, had fueled an anger so profound it had become a cold, guiding star. Now, that star led to this moment. The sheer weight of the truth we had uncovered was overwhelming. A testament to the lives she had crushed, the dreams she had extinguished. My parents' faces, clear as day in my mind's eye, spurred me onward. "Good," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal tremors. "Prepare the final package. It needs to be presented in a way that offers no escape, no wiggle room for her usual legal gymnastics." The next phase was critical. The direct confrontation. This wouldn't be a quiet arrest. It would be a public unraveling, a symbolic reclaiming of the power she had so carelessly wielded. We spent the next 72 hours in a relentless, almost surgical planning session. Every contingency was considered, every potential reaction from Whitley analyzed, the location, the timing, the sequence of events, it all had to be perfect. Victoria laid out the logistical options, considering everything from secure private estates to abandoned industrial complexes. "We need a location that's isolated enough for the initial confrontation, but with multiple escape routes for us, and enough pre-placed surveillance to ensure her full confession is captured and secure." I considered her words. Then a vision solidified in my mind. Not a neutral ground. Not her territory. "No," I stated, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my lips. "We meet her at the old Keller Innovations site, in the Midwest, the place where my parents' dreams were first shattered. It's time she faced the ghosts of her past. And mine." The idea resonated with a chilling poetic justice, a symbolic reclamation of sacred ground. The team exchanged glances, understanding the profound significance. The planning branched out. Thea began preparing the digital drop, the precise moment when the aggregated evidence would hit key media outlets and regulatory bodies, creating an inescapable dragnet around Whitley. Maya drafted the agreements, the confession, the forfeiture of assets, each clause watertight. Victoria began scouting the old site, ensuring its structural integrity, mapping out secure perimeters, and placing the hidden recording devices that would capture every syllable of Whitley's inevitable downfall. Every detail was cross-referenced, every team member's role rehearsed until it became second nature. Amidst the whirlwind of preparations, a quiet ache settled in my chest, a deep-seated need for a different kind of preparation. Before the final strike, before I became the instrument of justice, I needed to reconnect with the source of my resolve, the silent witnesses to the beginning of this decades-long war. I boarded a private jet, leaving the frantic energy of New York behind, flying west towards the quiet, unassuming landscape of my childhood. The Midwest greeted me with a cool autumn breeze, carrying the scent of damp earth and dying leaves. The small-town cemetery was almost empty, the silence profound, broken only by the rustling of trees. My parents' headstones, weathered by time, stood side by side. Thomas Keller, Elizabeth Keller. I knelt, my fingers tracing the cold stone of their names, the vibrant memories of their laughter, their dreams, their unyielding belief in a better world, mingled with the bitter taste of their defeat, their quiet despair. The image of my father's extinguished light, my mother's fading brilliance, was a wound I had carried for too long. "I'm coming for her, Mom, Dad," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, raw and exposed in the vast quiet. "The one who took everything from you. The one who thought she could do it again." A single tear, cold and sharp, traced a path down my cheek. A rare indulgence. This wasn't just revenge. It was an act of profound, generational love. It was for them. For the quiet desperation that had stolen their futures. For the promise of justice that had been denied. The visit wasn't just a moment of reflection. It was a reaffirmation. A deep wellspring of strength tapped from the very roots of my being. The weight of their past settled upon me, not as a burden, but as an armor. The certain fire that Whitley had sought to extinguish burned brighter than ever, fueled by their legacy, refined by my journey. Standing there, amidst the silent monuments to lives lived and lost, the emotional toll of my quest felt immense. A heavy mantle draped over my shoulders, but it also forged my resolve into something unbreakable, absolute. Eleanor Whitley had made a profound error. She had awakened not merely Adeline Vance, but the sleeping fury of the Keller legacy, and now, the time for slumber was over. The chilling silence of the old Keller Innovations factory was a balm, a stark, hollowed-out monument to a past I now fully embraced. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak autumn light that pierced the grimy windows, illuminating rusted machinery and the ghosts of my parents' dreams. This desolate landscape, a graveyard of ambition, was my chosen arena. I stood centered in the vast, empty space, my presence a deliberate counterpoint to the ruin around me. My cashmere now felt less like a garment, and more like the armor of a general awaiting her adversary. A convoy of black SUVs, incongruously sleek against the Midwest desolation, crunched onto the gravel drive. A single figure emerged, flanked by two imposing security personnel. Eleanor Whitley. She was as formidable in person as her reputation suggested. Her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Her eyes, sharp and calculating even from a distance, scanning the dilapidated factory with an air of amused disdain. She wore a tailored suit, a silent assertion of her unchanging power, even as she stepped into the literal ruins of one of her early conquests. She stopped several paces away, her gaze finally landing on me, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips. "Adeline Vance," she purred, her voice low and resonant, yet carrying an edge of mockery, or should I say, Keller? "Such an unexpected return to your roots." A dramatic gesture, but entirely transparent. Her eyes narrowed. "You think you have me cornered, child?" "I don't think, Eleanor," I replied, my voice steady, devoid of inflection. "I know." I gestured to the vast, empty space around us. "This is where it began. The blueprint for your empire of absorption. My parents' company, Keller Innovations. You remember it, don't you? Viridian Capital. Your first significant acquisition, disguised as a hostile takeover? You choked their innovations, stole their patents, and left them with nothing but despair. A pattern you perfected over decades." A flicker barely perceptible crossed her face, a recognition she quickly masked with an icy gaze. "Sentimentality is a weakness, Adeline. Your parents were naive. They didn't understand the true nature of capital." "No," I corrected, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. My eyes locked on hers. "They understood creation. You understand destruction." The air between us crackled, thick with unspoken history. And your destructive methods haven't changed, only the scale. I pulled out a tablet, its screen glowing with the raw, damning data Axiom had compiled. I didn't need to show it to her. The sheer weight of its existence was enough. Your network, Eleanor. Every shell company, every laundered dollar, every bribed official across 3 continents. Project Chimera. The systematic manipulation of emerging markets. The insider trading. The patent theft. It's all here. An unassailable case for racketeering, corporate fraud, and crimes against humanity. Spanning 50 years, her jaw tightened, her security guards stirred, but a subtle motion from my own team, hidden within the shadows of the factory's upper reaches, kept them at bay. This was my stage, my rules, and then there's Ronan. I continued, my voice hardening, each word a hammer blow. My marriage, my life, you saw my independence, my parents' legacy and my success, and you decided I too needed to be extinguished. Ronan wasn't just my husband, he was your pawn, a calculated part of your plan to infiltrate Vance Capital, dismantle my reputation, and absorb my clients, just like you did with my parents. You orchestrated the entire betrayal, down to Faye's involvement, ensuring my public humiliation was absolute. You sought to break me psychologically before you broke me financially, just to prove a point. Her composure finally fractured. A vein throbbed faintly in her temple. He told you that? She hissed, her eyes blazing with an unexpected fury. It wasn't the accusation that stung her, but the breach of her control, the unraveling of her carefully woven deception. He was always weak. He was a tool, I retorted, unwavering. And now, that tool has provided me with the final piece of your grand design. I held up a slim, bound document. This is your confession, Eleanor. An admission of guilt for every crime, every manipulation, every broken life. And this, I held up another stack of papers, is the agreement to forfeit every ill-gotten asset, every cent of your stolen wealth, to a trust administered by Axiom Capital, to compensate your victims, every single one of them. Including my parents. Her face, usually a mask of impervious power, contorted with rage, then a dawning, terrifying comprehension. You think you can dismantle my empire with a few papers, child? I am Eleanor Whitley. I own judges, senators, entire economies. You owned them because you operated in the shadows. I countered, stepping closer still, until only a few feet separated us. But your shadows are gone. Axiom Capital has cast a light so bright, it will incinerate everything you've built. Your choice is simple. Sign this, and the world will remember you as a mysterious billionaire who simply disappeared. Her vast fortune mysteriously reallocated to charitable causes, or refuse, and I will release this evidence, every single document, every encrypted message, every victim's testimony to every media outlet, every regulatory body, every government agency across the globe. You will face public humiliation, your name dragged through the mud, your legacy utterly destroyed. You will die in prison, a forgotten, reviled criminal. The choice is yours. Control your narrative or have it written for you. Her eyes darted around the cavernous factory, a lifetime of power visibly draining from her. She saw not weakness in my gaze, but an absolute, unyielding resolve. She knew I would do it. She saw the fire she had tried to extinguish twice, burning brighter than ever. After a long, agonizing silence, she extended a trembling hand. "Give me the pen," she rasped, her voice a hollow whisper. Her signature, a jagged scrawl, was the final tremor of a collapsing empire, the symbolic destruction of her legacy. The quiet reclamation of my own was complete. The silence that followed Eleanor Whitley's trembling signature was heavier than any spoken word, a quiet thud marking the collapse of an empire. My part of the bargain was fulfilled with ruthless efficiency. The moment Whitley's jet lifted from the makeshift runway outside the old factory, Thea initiated the data dump. Gigabytes of meticulously compiled evidence, financial ledgers, encrypted communications, witness testimonies. and the full weight of Whitley's signed confession cascaded into the public domain. It hit global news wires, regulatory bodies, and prosecutorial offices simultaneously. A digital tsunami designed to overwhelm any attempt at suppression. The first ripples of that tsunami swiftly reached New York, engulfing the Staffords. Margaret, still attempting to salvage what little remained of her reputation, was arrested in her Hamptons mansion, led away in handcuffs before a phalanx of flashing cameras. The charges were damning: conspiracy to commit financial fraud, insider trading, and obstruction of justice, all meticulously linked to Whitley's larger scheme. Faye Winters, less resilient and more desperate, tried to flee the country on a private jet, only to be intercepted at Teterboro Airport. Her trial was a media circus, showcasing the depths of her greed and complicity. Within months, both women were convicted. Margaret Stafford, stripped of her titles and assets, received a lengthy prison sentence, a stark fall from grace for the formidable matriarch. Faye Winters, once Ronan's smug lover, found herself behind bars, her ambition ending in disgrace and anonymity. There was a grim satisfaction in watching their carefully constructed worlds shatter, brick by painful brick. Ronan's fate, however, was markedly different. My leverage against him, his desperate confession linking Whitley to my parents' downfall, had carved him a narrow path to avoid outright imprisonment. His lawyers, scrambling to mitigate the damage, presented his cooperation as key to unraveling Whitley's vast network. He testified, painting a vivid, albeit self-serving, picture of Whitley's manipulative genius and his unwilling role as her pawn. His testimony, combined with the irrefutable evidence Axiom provided, contributed significantly to the swift movement of the larger case. For his complicity, Ronan was placed under strict house arrest for a decade, confined to a palatial but gilded prison in his Hamptons estate. His finances heavily monitored and his public reputation in tatters, he was spared the squalor of a cell. But his name, once synonymous with old money and privilege, was now a byword for weakness and betrayal. He lived, but his life was a shadow, a perpetual reminder of the woman he had underestimated. Eleanor Whitley, the architect of so much misery, never faced a public trial. Less than a week after our confrontation in the desolate factory, her body was discovered at her secluded Hamptons estate. The official report cited a massive cardiac arrest. But the circumstances were murky, shrouded in an almost poetic ambiguity. No evidence of foul play was ever found. No clear indication of a struggle. The world speculated wildly. Was it a desperate act of her own making? An unforeseen consequence of the immense stress? Or a final, ruthless cleanup by one of her innumerable shadowy associates who feared what she might further reveal? The truth remained elusive, locked away behind the impenetrable walls of her fallen empire. But her death, however it occurred, ensured her ultimate downfall was complete. A final, chilling punctuation mark on her reign of corruption. The public fallout was immense. A global reckoning. Governments launched investigations, financial markets reeled, and countless lives, once crushed beneath her heel, suddenly saw a glimmer of hope. With Whitley's empire dismantled and her assets frozen, the true work of healing could begin. Axiom Capital, no longer a phantom organization solely focused on vengeance, immediately shifted its resources to the recovery and distribution of her ill-gotten wealth. The sheer scale was staggering: billions in assets, repatriated from offshore trusts, reclaimed from shell corporations, and liquidated from vast real estate holdings. Maya's legal team worked tirelessly, navigating complex international laws to identify and compensate the innumerable victims of Whitley's decades of predation, from small businesses whose innovations she had stolen, to entire communities whose economies she had destabilized. The process was painstaking, but deeply meaningful. The first payments, flowing into accounts once emptied by her machinations, marked not just financial restitution, but the quiet, profound beginning of restoring faith in a justice that, against all odds, had finally been served. The tide of justice had turned, and its powerful currents began to wash away the stains of corruption. The silence that followed the deluge of justice was profound, almost deafening. The headlines had screamed for weeks. Margaret and Faye imprisoned, Ronan confined, Eleanor Whitley a posthumous villain. Billions were being meticulously returned to the coffers of those she had plundered. Lives slowly, painfully, stitching themselves back together. My parents' names, whispered in the hushed articles about Keller Innovations, were finally vindicated. Their dreams no longer a mere footnote in a corporate obituary, but a testament to what had been stolen. I had achieved it all. Every single objective, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. The score was settled, yet there was no triumphant cheer, no surge of exultant joy. Instead, an unexpected emptiness settled in the cavern of my chest, a vast, hollow space where the relentless fury had once burned. For months, years even, my life had been a singularity, a laser-focused trajectory towards this moment of reckoning. The pursuit of vengeance had been my compass, my fuel, the very architecture of my waking thoughts. Now, with the architect of my pain erased, the structure had crumbled, leaving me adrift in the debris of my success. The adrenaline, once my constant companion, receded, leaving behind a profound weariness that permeated bone and spirit. I stood on the balcony of a new, anonymous apartment, overlooking the quiet hum of Brooklyn, a world away from the gilded cages of my past. The city lights, once a symbol of ambition, now felt indifferent. What was Adeline Vance now? What was Keller? The persona that had driven this war, the phantom who had haunted the shadows, suddenly felt untethered, a weapon without a target. Was this all there was? The bitter taste of a hollow victory? To simply walk away? To disappear into the quiet anonymity of a life unburdened by purpose? Felt like a betrayal of the fire that had consumed me, and the lives that had propelled me forward. It felt small. It was Thea, ever perceptive, who cut through my contemplative fog. She found me late one night, surrounded by holographic projections of balance sheets outlining the victim's restitution efforts, yet staring blankly at nothing. "You look like a dog who finally caught the car," she observed, her tone devoid of judgment. Now what? Her simple question, though blunt, was a catalyst. I had avenged. But to what end? To merely prevent my time's suffering, my time's family's particular tragedy? Or was there a larger duty? A responsibility born from the very power I had cultivated? I looked at the faces of my team, their dedication unwavering, their skills unparalleled. Axiom Capital wasn't just a firm. It was a potent clandestine machine of justice. To simply shut it down, to disband these brilliant minds, would be a waste. Almost another form of injustice. A profound shift began to stir within me. A slow, deliberate turning of the tide. The vengeance, though satisfying in its completion, had been a destructive force. Now, I yearned to build, to protect, to prevent. The suffering of my parents, the quiet despair that had shadowed their final years, was a pain I understood intimately. Whitley's predatory nature wasn't unique. It was a pervasive sickness in the financial world, thriving in the shadows, preying on the vulnerable. How many other families, how many other promising innovations had been crushed under the heel of similar corporate titans? My mission, I realized with a sudden searing clarity, wasn't over. It had merely begun anew, transformed. Axiom Capital would no longer be a tool of personal retribution. It would evolve, expand, become a force for proactive protection. We would no longer merely seek to dismantle empires that had already done their damage, but to safeguard those on the precipice of being exploited. We would be a shield for the defenseless, a sword for the wronged, operating not from vengeance, but from a profound commitment to justice. I called an emergency meeting, gathering Thea, Maya, and Victoria in our secure New York facility. The air was charged with anticipation. Axiom Capital, I announced, my voice ringing with a newfound conviction, is changing course. We have proven our capabilities in dismantling a corrupt empire. Now, we will use those capabilities to build, to protect, to prevent. I laid out my vision. A global network dedicated to identifying, investigating, and neutralizing predatory financial corporations and systemic corruption before they could cause widespread damage. We would seek out vulnerable individuals, small businesses, and emerging startups targeted by ruthless entities. We would offer our expertise, our resources, our unparalleled intelligence to level the playing field, to ensure that no one else would suffer the slow, agonizing destruction my family had endured. This wasn't merely about financial protection. It was about upholding dignity, fostering innovation, and restoring faith in a system so often rigged against the honest. The silence that followed was not of confusion, but of profound understanding. I saw it in Maya's resolute nod, in Thea's eyes gleaming with renewed purpose, in Victoria's quiet, steadfast gaze. They understood that the end of one war was merely the beginning of another, far more noble, campaign. The emptiness in my heart began to recede, replaced by a nascent, powerful sense of purpose. The certain fire that Whitley had sought to extinguish twice was no longer fueled by anger, but by a deeper, more enduring flame, the unyielding desire to create a world where justice wasn't an anomaly, but an expectation. The journey from Adeline Vance to Keller, from victim to avenger, had finally forged a new path, that of a guardian. The hum of Axiom Capital's servers now sang a different tune, a symphony of foresight instead of retribution. My new Brooklyn penthouse, stripped of the opulent pretense of my past life, served as a functional, elegant command center. The large screen dominating one wall no longer tracked collapsing empires, but rather charted potential threats. Flashing green for neutralized risks, amber for ongoing engagements, and a stark red for imminent danger. The team I had built was more than just a collection of brilliant minds. They were a dedicated vanguard, united by a shared purpose that transcended personal gain. Thea, her fingers a blur across multiple keyboards, had evolved Axiom's digital intelligence into a proactive warning system. Her algorithms now scoured financial markets, dark web forums, and corporate filings for the subtle tremors that heralded predatory activity. Adeline, she'd chime, her voice often accompanied by the clatter of her ergonomic keyboard, got a new one. A small biotech startup in Silicon Valley. Patents are solid, but their seed funding is vulnerable. Looks like a familiar shell company is sniffing around, prepping a hostile buyout at pennies on the dollar. My parents' story, echoed in a new generation, always struck a chord. This time, we would intervene. Axiom's legal arm, led by Maya, would swiftly draft protective contracts, fortify patent defenses, and, if necessary, launch preemptive legal strikes that deterred the aggressors before they could even finalize their opening bids. The satisfaction of seeing a fledgling innovator, brimming with hope, able to continue their work unmolested, was a profound counterpoint to the bitterness of past victories. Victoria, ever the quiet enforcer, had expanded her operations beyond mere security. She now oversaw the physical protection of whistleblowers, the secure retrieval of evidence for legal battles, and the establishment of on-the-ground networks in communities vulnerable to corporate exploitation. Just last month, her team had successfully extracted a family of farmers in rural Oregon, whose ancestral land was being systematically poisoned by a mining conglomerate, trying to force them off their property. Axiom didn't just expose the pollution. We provided the legal counsel, the scientific analysis, and the logistical support for them to fight back and win, securing a landmark environmental victory that forced the corporation to clean up its act and compensate the affected families. The grateful tears of that family, transmitted through a secure video call, were a more potent reward than any monetary gain. My days were a relentless but deeply fulfilling rhythm. I no longer woke with a knot of anger in my stomach, but with a quiet sense of readiness. The emptiness that followed Whitley's downfall had long since evaporated, replaced by a sense of robust, living purpose. The Adeline Vance, who had built a glittering facade, And the Keller who had dismantled an empire had finally merged into something new, something more complete. I was a guardian, yes, but also an architect, building a legacy not of destruction, but of justice. I saw my parents in the eyes of every entrepreneur we protected, felt their quiet pride in every family whose future we secured. Their fire, once extinguished, now burned brightly through me. Through Axiom, a beacon against the darkness, looking out at the sprawling, bustling city below, a profound peace settled over me. The fight was endless. The hydra of corporate greed and systemic corruption would always attempt to regrow its heads. But Axiom Capital stood ready, a relentless force for good, a tireless protector of the vulnerable. My journey had been long, fraught with pain and fueled by the sharp edge of vengeance, but it had brought me here, to a place where I could use my unique blend of foresight, strategy, and ruthless efficiency not to destroy, but to safeguard. This was my true legacy, forged in the crucible of betrayal and tempered by a fierce, enduring hope. We were Axiom Capital, and our work, our mission, had only just begun. We would ensure that justice, for those who truly needed it, was not a distant dream, but a living, breathing reality.